This is the interview show, the Uniweb's interview show. Go, Ben East!
Here I am.
Welcome to the Uniweb's interview show. I'm your host, Matthew Whiteside. What's up, Ben?
Hey, everything's good. It's real late at night here. I know it's early morning for you, but I'm on the PM hours.
That's why you didn't scream like a maniac like I did, huh?
I'm very subdued. You know, I've got that belly split. You probably just had coffee, so yeah. It's about 8:30 here in Mumbai, India.
Oh my gosh, what are you doing in Mumbai, India?
So I work for the State Department. I'm a Foreign Service Officer, otherwise known as a diplomat.
Oh, very.
It's a career I've had for about 16 years now, but it's actually a lifestyle I've had for quite a bit longer than that. My first venture overseas was as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I went to Malawi, Africa, 96 to 98, I was out there. And, you know, that changed my life pretty much. I grew up in Connecticut and had never really left the state, but then went off to Africa for the first time and kind of fell in love with being overseas and have kept up at it ever since.
There's something about being in different cultures, right? It's like it expands your mind completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Getting to see different religions and different traditions and all that kind of stuff. Sorry, I was going to say, what's your favorite part about traveling overseas? Like,
you know, I really like living overseas. Traveling kind of blows, and a lot of it's because of airlines and all that stuff. But actually living in a place and sort of, you know, absorbing it, breathing it, walking to work through it is really what drives me, and it makes me feel good. And every 2 and 3 years I get to reinvent myself. So I don't mean that in any kind of weird way, but you know, I'm still the same person. I've always been writing. I've always been a writer, and I'm still at core the same person. But I take on a new job. I get different colleagues. I get different sets of challenges. I've worked in Africa, the Middle East, Latin America. This is my first time working here in India. I've been here about 6 months. And, you know, here's the best part about, well, not the best part, but one of the really great parts about being in India is constant festivals. They celebrate, you know, the religious festivals for a lot of different cultures and a lot of different parts of the country. So it's really nice to be here and sort of enjoy that.
It's a busy place, right?
Pretty busy. Mumbai is very busy. Yeah, we're 23 million.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's like over a billion.
In the country, yeah, it's 1.25 billion in all of India. Mumbai itself is 23 million.
Wow.
Yeah, so a lot to learn, a lot to absorb.
Are you friends with all of them?
Getting there. That's my.
You've had 6 months. What have you been doing? I'm sorry, say it again. Sound's cutting out a little bit.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, you're a diplomat, but you're also an author. Like you said, you've written your whole life, correct?
That's true. Yeah. So I've put out 2 books that have been published. The first one came out about 3 years ago. That's 2 Pumps for the Body Man. And I think, you know, we were talking earlier about marketing and how writing is actually really, the writing part isn't all that difficult, but the marketing part is a real lesson. And I think when you come out with a title like 2 Pumps for the Body Man, you're kind of
a really cool title
for failure, in all honesty. And, you know, feeding into that was this idea that I would design my own cover. And I found myself, you know, several months after the book was published, I was listed on this website. I'd been selected on lousybookcovers.com. That didn't feel too good. Yeah.
Hey, what's the saying? Negative attention is better than no attention, right?
That's right. The only thing not being talked about is not being talked about.
That's right. Yeah. So the cover was they just didn't like the cover. I mean, you know, it doesn't look bad.
I don't mind pulling it up. I'm not ashamed, but. It's, you know, it meant a lot to me, and to anybody who actually reads the book would understand what's going on here. But, you know, that's not the point of the cover, as anyone who writes books learns. The point of the cover is to actually bring the reader in, not to sort of be a mystery for them to resolve after the fact. So, you know, this cover is interesting to me. If you don't mind, I'll tell you a little bit about the story.
Please do.
The story is set in Saudi Arabia, and it's in a port city, and where I was working in Saudi Arabia, there was a hospital across the street from the diplomatic mission I worked at, and it sort of overlooked the compound, and that seemed like a very dangerous thing, because at that time Saudi Arabia, you know, we were constantly on alert and look out for terrorists. You know, the 9/11 hijackers were issued visas out of that consulate to a large degree. I think 11 of them were issued visas out of there. So we were constantly on the alert for this kind of activity. And here we had this building, this hospital that's, you know, looking down into our compound and will allow people to sort of figure out what our movements are. And so, you know, if you look again at the book cover, you can see that that's actually a building, and you'd have to read the book to understand why that matters. But basically, the book recounts, and it's a satire. It's sort of your catch-22 for the war on terror, and it sort of lightens the mood on what it's like to be a diplomat in a difficult situation.
Right.
So, but in the end, of course, there's an element of tragedy, just like in Catch-22. You know, you've got Snowden who gets blown to bits up in his plane, and down here in Two Pumps for the Body Man, we've got our own set of tragedies, based basically on the conflict between the head of the diplomatic mission, who's the consul general, and her security chief, who's really, you know, very in tune with the dangerous environment around him, while this consul general is actually more about partying and having fun and whooping up, which is, in a way, it's part of the role of a diplomat, is to create a spirit of friendship and good times with the local culture. But so this story kind of uncovers the conflict between the need for great security and the need for, you know, bringing contacts and bringing people together as a diplomat.
Well, it's really interesting, the international intrigue. This is something I have no experience in or knowledge of whatsoever. One of the many things I have zero knowledge in, but it sounds extremely intriguing. I'd love to check it out. How long has the book actually been out for?
Oh, I think it came out in spring of 2016, so it'll be 3 years this March that it's been out. Yeah,
and
I can flip you a copy. That's really easy to do.
Yeah, man. Absolutely, that'd be cool. Yeah, and you went through a traditional publishing house, or how'd you go about getting it published?
Well, I made that run, you know what I mean? Like, I spent, this book I wrote for 10 years. That process took 10 years to bring out. And a lot of that was, the first 2 and 3 years was writing it, bringing the manuscript to completion. Then I spent probably 5 years trying to sell it to agents, to publishers. I went all different routes. I have not thousands, but I have hundreds of rejections and hundreds of ignored messages. And, you know, that was a hard process, but, you know, it makes you resilient. And then finally, so I was going through that process while I was still overseas, and I came back to Washington for a little while, and I was able to kind of hunker down and really focus. And I built up a blog and did book reviews. And I think doing the book reviews helped me get attention to my craft, and sort of in that context, I uncovered 2 publishers. They're independent publishers. This one was published by New Pulp Press. It's an independent publisher, and they took on all the labor and the costs of putting it out. And so, yeah, it's not traditional, but it's also sort of, it wasn't something that I had to put out on my own, which I appreciate. I liked having the platform of another outside source having vetted my work and said, this is good enough.
Absolutely, yeah. That validation is like something I know for myself as a writer and creator. It's like I crave it. Like I need it so bad. And for you to have, like you said, have those thousands of rejections, and then just still keep on trucking along. That's inspirational, man. That's like, I know there's so many people out there. You know, I've talked to a lot of indie authors who are in the querying process of trying to find an agent, trying to find a publisher. You know, what kind of advice would you give to them?
You know, you got to keep at it, and I think you've got to not keep sending the same thing out. You need to revise, and it also means take it back off the market for a little while and revisit your manuscript. See what's wrong with not just how you're selling your story, but with your story itself. And then, and this might seem as a bit of a antithetical to what writers really want to do. But I would even make an argument for, look at what's going on in your environment that could help you sell it. Is there a way you can add a hook? And it doesn't have to be phony. It can still be authentic. But what can you do to make this interesting from a marketing standpoint?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, so and that's this is a perfect example. I was trying to sell satire, and I had bites. I will say I had, I sat down with a New York agent at one point, and it's kind of a long story, so I won't tell it, but this guy had read my thing, and he shows up at the table where we met, and he plunks down the manuscript that I mailed to him, hundreds of pages. This was, at the time, the story was like 100,000 words long, and he had all those pages there, and he marked all over it, and he sent me marching away with ideas to make it better. So I had gone that route, but then it just sort of fizzled for me. I mean, this was a timely story when the war on terror was hot, but then as George Bush years started to wane, there was less and less interest. And so I had to recognize that reality. And what I did was I started reviewing books, like I said, and I found that, crime fiction really interested me, and it was also kind of an easier sell. There was more of a market for it. So I rewrote the whole story all over again, and I took the sort of broad-ranging narrative and I focused it on the diplomatic security officer whose name is Jeff Mutton, and I sort of made Jeff Mutton the storyteller, and he's your hard-boiled Dick. He's your hard-boiled cop telling the story.
Nice. Okay.
And so I gave him a nice little problem. I gave him a foot fetish. So here he is in a country like Saudi Arabia, and he's got a foot fetish to deal with. So it was I made it both serious and more fun in that way. And I changed the whole story, but the story, that contrast and conflict between diplomacy and security, the need to be out and the need to be safe, are still here. They're still very much here, but it's told in a different way than it ever looked like it was going to be when I first started writing it.
Wow. So yeah, the 10-year process really taught you a lot about what. Man, that's incredible to reinvent your entire story, basically.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah. But that's the thing you got to do, right? I mean, if you want to be a writer, and if you want people to read what you're writing, it's like, you have to make certain cuts and sacrifices, I suppose, and it's all about getting better too, right?
I mean, yeah, I do think there's a sacrifice involved. I think that, I still admire the concept of Catch-22, and I think this story had its strengths as it was, but I also made it better in its own way. So yeah, you got to be willing to part. They say kill your darlings, right? And but I gave new life to this, and it's better in some ways, it's worse in others, but it's out there. The story is out there, and I love that. And even if nobody's picking it up or reading it or commenting on it, at least for me, it's like, do your worst, world. I'm out there. I like.
Yeah, so it's available Amazon,
Barnes and Noble carries.
Barnes and Noble.
Yeah, usual outlets. Yeah.
Okay. So what about Patchworks?
Patchworks is a domestic story, and Patchworks follows a he's a government studies intern. He's basically a grad student who's he's a 20-something. He's sort of figuring things out, and he works for a arm of the government called the Bureau of Government Intelligence and Execution. And if you look at the acronym, it spells bogey, right? So here he is. He's assigned to bogey, and it's basically an entity that looks at what is the government doing right and what is the government doing wrong. Okay. And so he sits down to work in the cube farm where he's assigned, and his boss says, "Hey, I need you to help me plan my wedding." And his buddy says, "Hey, I need you to help me hook up with this girl." And the security officer hounds him. He says, "Hey, your password's expired." And then this other guy, who's the shredder guy, gets his tie stuck in the shredder, and he's like, got to fight with him. There's never any water in the water room, so it's called the no water room. It's this bizarre situation of, here's the one part of government that's meant to look at what's working well, and it can't even function in its own right.
It's completely out of whack.
Yeah, and you throw into this office all these problems that we see today, like government shutdowns. I was writing this in 2013, and you may recall that there was a government shutdown in September 2013, and a lot of my emotions about, I just got a mortgage. How am I going to pay for my mortgage if I can't go to work and can't get paid? All these things are very real. So that sort of again, it's a satire, but I'm bringing in these real world issues. And then on top of it is the very serious matter of gun violence in the U.S. So one of their colleagues is basically, he's got two young boys, and they basically become victims of gun violence, and we watch the story propel from there. So look, here's another cover that I designed myself, and I like it a lot better. I'm going to show it to your viewers. I've designed all my own covers, and this one I like a lot more. But anyway,
it really pops.
Thanks.
Yeah, I like it. It sounds like a pretty amazing story.
I love this story. I think the marketing of it's tough because, it does deal with tragedy in its own way. And you don't want to seem like you're kind of peddling in that, but I do think there's a lot of truth to this story, and I do wish people would appreciate what it means to be sort of a part of a government that's trying to do the right thing but just can't quite get itself together.
They're trying. It's like, give them some credit for trying. I can imagine it's an extremely tough thing. It's not, I mean, there's like a million billion moving parts to try to organize, and trying to get them all moving together in one direction is like, to talk about herding cats, it's like to the 100th degree, right?
True. Yeah. There's a lot of petty little issues even in one department.
Yeah. Awesome. So what would you say some of your inspirations were growing up in terms of reading, and what got you into writing this type of work?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'd have to say that I really started getting serious about writing at about the time when writers like Jack Kerouac were of interest to me. So this is like college years, and On the Road meant a lot to me, the Dharma Bums, those books. And I had a really great professor. He's gone now, but he introduced us, and I'd already read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a lot of Norman Mailer we were reading, but he introduced me to a lot of what those writers were doing, the 60s and 70s time frame. Well, obviously Kerouac's a bit earlier than that. So
Jack Kerouac was known for like a lot of stream of consciousness writing, right? He would just kind of like flow with it, and
they say he wrote On the Road in like 14 days on a roll of paper. Just put that roll in his typewriter and banged it out, and yeah, hardcore. Yeah. But of course I revisit that stuff now and then, and I admire it less, so I wouldn't sort of fix my wagon to it. A really great writer that I still admire is Paul Theroux. Paul Theroux is a great travel writer, but also a great novelist. He's put out scores of books, but he was also a Peace Corps volunteer in Malawi, where I was a volunteer. So there's that added inspiration to kind of check in with what he's up to. He was one of the first groups of volunteers to go to Malawi, and he was actually kicked out of the country in the early 60s. He was accused of plotting a coup against the president, which he was. He was just kind of duped by the German security services. So that was kind of interesting. Say what?
It was all being made up by somebody else. They were trying to get him. They were trying to bring him down.
No. They were. I think he was just duped as a young man abroad.
Oh, okay. It sounds like all your work throughout your life. It sounds like, I mean, you just said you were in the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're very service oriented, doing for others, having that kind of mindset. What is it that kind of drives you towards that? I mean, what's your? I like to ask people's why about why they do things. What is it that motivates you to do that kind of stuff?
I feel lucky that there's the reputation of service attached to the Peace Corps, and I don't mean to downplay my own interest in doing the right thing, but I honestly did the Peace Corps because I needed some adventure. I needed to get out. I was sort of stuck in a vessel. I grew up in Connecticut. I'd gone to school in Connecticut. I graduated with an education degree from Connecticut, and my next step was to go teach in Connecticut. And that just wasn't with me. I had to go, and the Peace Corps was I won't call it an escape route, but it was certainly, it got me going. And I mean, I'm not going to say that I do it all for service, but I do appreciate the fact that the work I do even now actually does help those folks who aspire to, say, study in the U.S. My work very much helps bring them to the U.S. So I do like that. You're right.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you're giving people who otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to expand their horizons, like you were able to do.
Yeah, Correct.
Yeah, it's a pretty noble cause. That's really cool. So are you working on any books now? Are you writing
Yeah.
anything now? Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing I'm working on now is a lot more fun. I decided to take a break from the serious stuff, and when each of my sons turned 8, I wrote them a novel. So I wrote these 2 middle grade books, and
Okay.
I put them on the shelf. And so now 3 years later, I'm looking at the first one again, and I'm doing that revision process. And I like what I see, and I think I'm pretty close to finishing this revision, and I will, I think, shop it around. I would like to see if I can't bring it out commercially. That's my goal. So it's not, now I've kind of switched hats from being a writer to being my own editor, which all writers are, but also being a marketing person. I'm trying to think of myself as my agent toward getting an agent or a publisher. And
Yeah.
as the revision process, I'm thinking, does this hit the points it needs to be good middle grade? Does it have the voice that it needs to? Will it resonate with that age group? Is it good for girls and boys? Is it also interesting and original, or is it covering old ground? So I'm trying to make sure I bring a lot of new thinking into how the story itself is told, rather than just laying in bed with my son and reading it to him. So that's a
Right.
challenge.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because when you change genres like that, you really have to completely change your mindset. I mean, it's not. I mean, I can't go from writing a children's book to writing a deeply sci-fi mature adult book with, just at the drop of a hat. You've got to change processes of what you're doing. And I mean, your whole mentality, because I talked to somebody else, and it's basically like being schizophrenic to the point where you're kind of in your characters' heads, or they're in your head, So I feel like I don't know. I like to start reading other books in the genre that I'm working on at the time. But obviously, writing something you're passionate about. What's the actual story about, if you don't mind me asking?
Right. So in this case, the story is about 2 kids who are fairly isolated. It's a boy who lives at the ex-governor's mansion, and this girl who moves into the neighborhood. Her name is Sylvie. She's new to the school, but then summer comes and school lets out, and they haven't really made any friends. So the 2 of them together end up exploring the woods around what's called the ex-governor's mansion, which is near where they live.
Okay.
Albert lives there. And all the kids from school have gone off to this lake in town called Lake Ponderosa. So they're all alone, and they're exploring the woods, and each of them has a strength. So at first, Albert is teaching Sylvie how to ride a bike and how to hit a baseball. And then as they explore through the woods, they reach the lake, and Albert has to confess that he doesn't know how to swim. And so Sylvie is teaching him how to swim. And this all sort of overlays Albert's own inability to dream and his own inability to know really where he's from. And so the 2 of them, and they're 5th graders, so actually they're 4th graders.
Okay.
When I first, they were 2nd graders, but now they're 4th graders. And I think that suits a little bit because there's more independence to the 2 kids. All the time, they're kind of aware or conscious of footfalls behind them in the forest. And sort of when we reach this clearing by the lake, and they start building a tree house there, they come to realize what those footfalls were. And there's a great climax where these 2 kids from their class from the beginning of the book, who are called the Harkness twins, but everybody calls them Harkness twins because that's that. And they tell terrible jokes and stories like that. They end up that's where the climax arises. So yeah, that's the story.
That sounds pretty awesome. Yeah.
Sure, I guess. Pardon.
Yeah. Moving to a 5th grade or 4th grader would be, or 5th grader would be a lot easier to write. I feel like 2nd grade, 1st grade is kind of like extremely early childhood, to where the personality is still developing, right? And trying to.
Yeah. And they don't have enough independence that you can reliably set them off into the world. You know what I mean? With, like an irresponsible adult.
Yeah, I'm letting my 6-year-old go run around in the woods by themselves. Like, where are these parents at, man? Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. So you're working on those, and you've been out there for 6 months now. Are you going to be out there for a couple of years? Your assignment?
Yeah, this is a 3-year assignment. So we're slated to come back to the States around 2021. We could extend another year. We're happy here. I don't see us eager to go, but sometime we'll spend 3 or 4 years here and then go back to Washington, which is where our kids have spent a lot of their their elementary years.
Very cool. I know we talked before the interview about timing with you. I did want to ask before we go here. So in terms of legacy, I ask everybody this question. Your legacy that you're looking to leave the world or people who read your books, what is the reason for the writing and the legacy you're looking to leave behind?
Oh, thanks. That's a thoughtful question. I guess my answer is that I would like people to sort of laugh. I want them to enjoy it and have fun with it at the end, and I want them to laugh at themselves, you know, because that's what I try to do, and I don't really
laugh at myself all the time.
Why you're such a willing interviewer, so.
Yeah. Constantly laughing. Awesome. So you want to leave the legacy of laughter.
Yeah, that's what I'd wrap it up as saying.
Man, I think there's like really no greater gift than giving people that joy in life, especially when, I mean, the topics you've touched on in your books are difficult topics, right? I mean, terrorism, working in government, all that kind of stuff, gun control. Being able to laugh at those things, that's what it seems scary at first, but in honesty, it's like we have to learn how to laugh at these things, because otherwise they turn us into monsters. They turn us into the monsters we don't want to be, you know? And I feel like laughter is that separation for us. If we can find some way to, you know, find joy in the misery that is life sometimes, then we're really helping ourselves, and we're able to help other people too.
Well said. Nice. Yeah.
I wrote it down before it was all written out. Ben East, I'm gonna link all your books, your website, your blog. Is there anything else you want me to add in the description of this interview for the readers or for the watchers?
No, you let me cover the ground, and I really appreciate that you did that, Matt. This is great, and I hope that I can return the favor and host you on my site sometime. We'll get an interview going, and I'll hear about what you're writing. So, you know, we talked about
man,
and I would like to make it happen. So let's do that.
There's nothing I love talking about more than myself. YouTube channel is because I love looking at myself on camera.
You want Ben East books? Yeah.
Ben East books. All right, man. I'm gonna add all those links in, and if you ever need anything from me and the UniWeb family, where all people become one people, let us know, man. Thank you, Ben. Have a great night.
All right. You too. Have a great day.
Thanks.